I was blowing out the candles when everyone started singing. Then I dropped my napkin. As I bent to pick it up, I heard my mother's voice from the hallway. Quiet, cold, certain. Tell Bakery to change Nia's locks tonight. She mustn't get back inside before morning. For a second, I thought she'd said someone else's name. Then my father answered, "She'll never see it coming." I stood up smiling and finished cutting my birthday cake while pretending my entire world hadn't just fallen apart. My name is Nia Adebayo, 33 years old, a senior interior designer in Johannesburg. For 8 years, I'd worked tirelessly to help my parents recover after my father's transport company collapsed. I paid hospital bills, covered mortgage arrears, helped my younger brother Bakery launch a car detailing business, and even renovated the family home. Everyone called me the dependable daughter, the one who never complained, the one who always came when family needed her. I never imagined my birthday dinner had only one purpose: to make sure I was distracted while my own family erased me from my life. The restaurant was full of laughter, warm lights, and the smell of fresh food. It looked like the perfect birthday celebration. My mother smiled more than usual as she placed the birthday cake in front of me. My father raised his glass and wished me happiness and success. Bakery joked with everyone, but every time I looked at him, he quickly looked away. At first, I thought he was just tired, but something about him felt different. He barely touched his food and kept checking his phone under the table. My father also looked at his watch again and again, as if he was waiting for a certain time. It felt strange, but I pushed the thought away because I wanted to enjoy my birthday. As everyone started singing for me, I smiled and closed my eyes before blowing out the candles. Just then, my napkin slipped onto the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and when I stood, I heard my mother's voice coming from the hallway. She thought nobody was listening. Her voice was quiet but clear. Tell Bakery to change Nia's locks tonight. She mustn't get back inside before morning. My heart stopped. I stayed completely still. Then my father answered in a calm voice, "She'll never see it coming." For a moment, I wondered if they were talking about someone else. Then they said my name again, and every bit of hope disappeared. I forced myself to smile, walked back to the table, and thanked everyone for coming. My hands shook as I cut my birthday cake, but I acted as if nothing had happened. I wanted answers before anyone knew I had heard their secret. So I watched every face, every smile, and every small movement. Then I saw Bakery quietly reach into his pocket and slip my spare house keys inside his jacket. I stared at him in silence, asking myself one question. Why did my brother suddenly need my keys? I left the restaurant before anyone else. I smiled, thanked everyone for the birthday wishes, and said I was tired after a long week at work. Nobody tried to stop me. My mother even hugged me tightly and told me to drive safely. Her smile looked warm, but after what I had heard, it no longer felt real. As I walked to my car, I kept asking myself if I had misunderstood the conversation. Maybe there was another reason they had mentioned changing the locks. Maybe they were talking about someone else. I wanted to believe that, but deep inside I knew they were talking about me. I had only been driving for a few minutes when my phone rang. It was Bakery. I ignored the call. A minute later, he called again. Then again. Finally, I answered. His voice sounded nervous. He asked, "Where are you now?" I told him I was still on the road. He quickly asked which road I was using and how long it would take me to get home. Before I could ask why, he said he would call me later and ended the call. A few minutes passed, and he called again with the same questions. Every call made my heart beat faster. It felt as if he wanted to know my exact location every minute. Instead of driving home, I turned into a small cafe that stayed open late. I ordered a cup of coffee but hardly touched it. I sat by the window and replayed everything in my mind. Suddenly, many strange moments from the last few months started making sense. My parents had insisted on keeping spare keys even after I offered to change the locks for security. Bakery had often asked about my work trips and what days I would be away from home. My mother had become strangely interested in my insurance papers, my property documents, and even my mail. At the time, I thought they were only trying to help. Now every question felt planned. After nearly an hour, I decided I could not hide forever. I had to go home and see the truth with my own eyes. When I reached my gate, I entered the usual security code, but the keypad flashed red. I tried again. It failed again. Someone had already changed the code. My hands started shaking. The lights inside the house were on, so I knocked on the door again and again. No one answered. Then I heard heavy footsteps behind the house. I walked around the side and froze. 2 moving trucks were parked outside. Men were carrying my furniture, my clothes, and even the birthday gifts I had received that evening into the back of a van as if my life already belonged to someone else. I stood there in complete shock as the movers carried my life out of the house. My sofa, my dining table, the pictures I had hung on the walls, and even the boxes of childhood memories I had carefully packed were being loaded into a truck. I ran toward them and shouted for them to stop. One of the workers looked confused and said they were only following instructions from the property owners. I pulled out my phone and called the police. My voice shook as I tried to explain that strangers were emptying my house while I was locked outside. A few minutes later, the police arrived. I rushed toward them, expecting everything to be cleared up quickly. Before I could explain everything, another car pulled into the driveway. My parents stepped out. They looked surprised to see the police standing outside the house. My father acted confused and asked what was happening. My mother walked calmly toward me without showing any fear. She looked straight into my eyes and quietly said, "This isn't your house anymore." For a moment, I could not even speak. I thought I had heard her wrong. I asked her what she meant. She folded her arms and repeated the same words. "The house no longer belongs to you." Then Bakery arrived carrying a large brown file. He opened it and handed several papers to the police officers. He confidently said that months earlier I had agreed to transfer the house to the family. He pointed to signatures on the documents and claimed everything had been done legally. I grabbed the papers from his hands and stared at them. My name was written on every page. The signatures looked similar to mine, but I knew one thing with complete certainty. I had never signed those documents. Not one page. Not one agreement. Not one form. I begged the officers to believe me. I told them someone had stolen my identity and forged my signature. They carefully looked through the paperwork but finally shook their heads. One officer explained that because legal ownership documents were being disputed, this was now a civil matter. They said the courts would have to decide who was telling the truth. They could not remove anyone from the property that night. I stood outside the locked gate with nothing except my handbag and my phone. The home I had worked so hard to build was suddenly no longer mine. As the trucks drove away with everything I owned, only one question remained in my mind. If I never signed those papers, who had forged every single document? That night, I had nowhere to go until my work colleague, Lulu, insisted that I stay at her apartment. She gave me her spare room and told me not to lose hope. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw strangers carrying my belongings out of the house I had worked so hard to pay for. The next morning, I decided I would not spend another day crying. If I wanted my life back, I needed proof. The first step was replacing all the important documents I no longer had. I visited the bank to request copies of my mortgage records and account statements. The bank manager greeted me kindly because we had worked together for years. As he looked through my file, his expression slowly changed. He became quiet and looked at the papers again. Finally, he said something that caught my attention. He explained that some of the signatures on recent documents did not look exactly like the ones I had used for years. They were similar, but small details were different. Then he noticed something even stranger. The mortgage payments had continued coming from my bank account every month, but the ownership records had changed to different names. That should never have happened. He told me the records did not match and suggested I speak to a lawyer immediately. Later that afternoon, the lawyer carefully reviewed every document I had collected. After almost an hour, he leaned back in his chair and said this was not a mistake made in one day. Someone had been planning this for months. They had changed addresses, filed paperwork, and created a trail that looked legal from the outside. Whoever did this had been very patient. As I left his office, I remembered something sitting on my desk at work. Earlier that week, my receptionist had mentioned that one letter had been delivered there instead of my home. I rushed to my office and found the unopened envelope exactly where she had placed it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was an official notice about the transfer of my house. Ownership. The letter had been sent weeks earlier, but I had never seen it before. I checked the date again and again. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. This was not the first letter. Someone had changed my mailing address months ago and intercepted every warning before it could ever reach me. The plan had been hidden from me from the very beginning. Bakery had not slept properly since my birthday dinner. Every night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling while the same questions filled his mind. He kept telling himself that everything had happened legally, but something inside him refused to believe it. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the look on my face when I stood outside the locked gate with only my handbag. It was a look he could not forget. His wife, Amara, noticed the change immediately. He barely spoke during dinner and kept checking his phone. Whenever a new message arrived, he quickly read it and deleted it before anyone could see it. One evening, Amara finally asked him what was wrong. At first, he said everything was fine, but she knew he was hiding something. She reminded him that he had never kept secrets from her before. After a long silence, he admitted that he could not stop thinking about me. He said something about the whole situation did not feel right anymore. As he sat alone later that night, memories from the past few months began returning one by one. He remembered how their mother had often called him into a room for private conversations. She had told him that Nia had changed after becoming successful. She claimed I no longer cared about the family and was only pretending to help. She even said I planned to sell the house without telling anyone and leave them with nothing. She warned him that if they did not act first, they would all lose their home. At the time, Bakery believed every word because he trusted our mother. Looking back, he realized something strange. He had never actually heard me say any of those things. Every story had come from someone else. Whenever he tried to ask me about the house, our mother would quickly change the subject or tell him she had already spoken to me. The next morning, Bakery quietly opened an old box filled with family papers. He wanted to prove to himself that everything had been done honestly. He spread the documents across the table and carefully checked every page. As he compared the dates, he noticed something that made his stomach turn. Some forms were supposedly signed before meetings had even taken place. Other documents were dated on days when I had been working in another city. The timeline simply did not make sense. Bakery slowly leaned back in his chair. His hands started shaking. For the first time, he realized the painful truth. I was not the only person who had been deceived. Someone had carefully lied to him too, and he had helped destroy the life of the sister who had always stood by his side. A few days later, while I was still staying with Lulu, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Mama Saad, the elderly woman who had lived across the street from my house for many years. She smiled kindly and asked if she could come inside. After we sat down, she looked at me with concern and said she had heard what had happened. Then she quietly added, "I think I have something you need to see." I looked at her with confusion. She explained that after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood a few years earlier, she had started a small private security company with her sons. As part of the business, they had installed security cameras facing the street outside several homes, including mine. The cameras recorded everything that happened on the road day and night. She shook her head and said nobody had ever asked her if the cameras had captured anything. My heart started beating faster as she took out a small memory drive. We connected it to Lulu's laptop and began watching the recordings. At first, everything looked normal. Cars passed by, neighbors walked their dogs, and delivery drivers came and went. Then the dates changed to the weeks when I had been traveling for work. The video showed someone unlocking my front gate and walking inside. It was not a stranger. It was my mother. I stared at the screen without saying a word. A few days later, another recording showed her returning again. This time, she was carrying a large folder filled with documents. On another day, she arrived with 2 locksmiths. They entered the house together and stayed inside for nearly an hour before leaving. A week later, she came back alone and spent several more hours inside while I was still away on business. The recordings continued for months. She kept visiting the house again and again whenever I was out of town. Sometimes she carried files. Sometimes she met different people. Sometimes she simply walked through every room before locking the door behind her. By the time the last video ended, I finally understood the truth. This had never been a sudden family argument or an emotional decision made in anger. Every visit, every document, every change, and every step had been carefully planned long before my birthday. Someone had spent months building a perfect trap, and the person leading it had been my own mother. After watching the security recordings, my lawyer became even more determined to find the truth. He said the videos proved someone had entered my house many times, but we still needed to understand why my own family would go to such great lengths. He began searching through old legal records, property files, and documents connected to my parents. Days later, he called me into his office with a serious look on his face. He placed an old file on the desk and said he had found something almost everyone had forgotten. Many years earlier, my parents had created a family trust when my father's transport business was growing quickly. The trust had been meant to protect the family's property if the business ever faced financial problems. After the company collapsed, everyone believed the trust had become worthless, so nobody talked about it again. But the documents were still there, and they explained far more than we expected. As we read through the papers, painful memories came back to me. Years ago, when my father's business failed, he was drowning in debt. Banks were demanding payment, and the family was close to losing everything. I had just started doing well in my career, so I quietly used my savings, took extra design projects, and even borrowed money to help clear many of those debts. I never told anyone outside the family because I wanted to protect my father's dignity. I believed helping my parents was simply the right thing to do. The lawyer looked at me and quietly said that the financial records matched my story perfectly. My payments had saved the family home, but there was something else hidden in the documents. My father had accepted my help, yet he never truly recovered from the shame of needing his daughter to rescue him. My mother saw that pain every day. Instead of feeling thankful, she slowly began believing that my success had taken away her husband's pride. In her mind, I had become a reminder of his failure instead of the daughter who had saved the family. Bakery never knew any of this. He had been too young to understand what happened during those difficult years. He grew up believing our parents had solved their own problems. Nobody ever told him the truth. Then my lawyer pointed to one final date in the file. My birthday had not been chosen by chance. It was the exact day the legal waiting period connected to the property transfer came to an end. While I was celebrating with my family, they had been waiting for the clock to reach the moment when they believed nothing could stop their plan. A few weeks later, my lawyer arranged a formal mediation meeting before the case went to court. I invited my parents, Bakery, and everyone involved to attend. They all expected the meeting to turn into another painful family argument. They probably thought I would cry, accuse everyone, or beg for my home back. But when I walked into the room, I felt calm. I had spent weeks collecting the truth, and I no longer needed to raise my voice for anyone to hear it. Everyone took their seats around the long table. My mother sat with her arms folded, looking completely confident. My father avoided looking at me. Bakery looked tired and nervous. The mediator asked if anyone wanted to speak first. I quietly nodded and placed a thick folder on the table. I started with the security recordings from Mama Sada's cameras. One by one, the videos showed my mother entering my house while I was away on business. The room became completely silent as everyone watched her carrying document folders into the house. Then another video showed her arriving with locksmiths weeks before my birthday. Nobody said a single word. Next, I handed over the bank records. They showed that every mortgage payment had come from my account, even after the ownership records had secretly changed. The bank manager's written report explained that the signatures on the transfer documents did not match my real signature. Then my lawyer presented the official postal records proving that my mailing address had been changed without my knowledge. We also showed the unopened letter that had accidentally reached my office instead of the false address. After that came the locksmith invoices. The dates matched the security videos perfectly. Every visit, every lock change, and every document fitted together like pieces of one plan. Finally, I placed one last file on the table. It contained a complete timeline of every payment I had made for the house over the years. Every transfer, every receipt, and every bank statement proved how much I had sacrificed to protect my family. I never shouted. I never insulted anyone. I simply let the evidence speak for me. I looked across the table and saw Bakery staring at the papers with wide eyes. His hands slowly began to shake. He looked at our mother, then at me, and then back at the documents again. In that moment, something changed inside him. He finally understood that he had never been the special child who was trusted more than his sister. He had only been the easiest person to believe every lie and the easiest person to use against the one sister who had always protected him. When the mediation meeting ended, nobody moved for several seconds. The room was filled with silence. Then my father slowly stood up and looked at the mediator. In a quiet voice, he asked if everyone else could leave the room for a few minutes. My lawyer looked at me, and I gave a small nod. One by one, everyone walked outside. My mother looked angry as she left. Bakery paused at the door, looked at me with regret, and then quietly followed the others. The door closed, leaving only my father and me. He stayed standing for a moment before sitting across from me. He looked older than I had ever seen him. His hands rested on the table, and they were shaking slightly. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he finally looked into my eyes. He admitted that everything had gone too far. He told me my mother had wanted complete control over every family asset. After the business failed years earlier, she became afraid of losing everything again. She believed the only way to protect the family was to make sure every property was under her control. At first, he argued with her, but after months of pressure, he stopped fighting. He confessed that he had agreed to things he knew were wrong because he was afraid that saying no would destroy his marriage. Then he told me the truth about the birthday. The plan had never been only about changing the locks. They